morning, everyone. My name's Josh. If we haven't had the chance to meet, our family just moved to the Columbus area this summer, and we were living up in Northeast Ohio, and I have a Northeast Ohio story to tell you, okay? So often we would go visit friends or go hiking in an area called Cuyahoga Falls, and on your way there, and even if you still went there today, what you will see as you drive into the city limits is this huge circular shaped church that fits, I think, like 5,400 people. And this church was built back in the 1950s. It was built by a televangelist named Rex Hummard, okay? So in the 1950s, when the televangelists were like a new thing, he was the first one to have like a weekly public broadcast of their gigantic production. Okay? So you can find all this online. It said that he reached, I think, over 20 million viewers globally. So he was a big deal, such a big deal that Elvis Presley knew who he was. And when he died, Rex Hummard officiated Elvis Presley's funerals. This guy's a big deal. And in 1971, they decided they were going to build a tower. It was going to have a rotating restaurant on the top of it, and it was going to be like the television broadcast for their program, right? We're building a new building right now, Movement, and you're regretting we didn't put in a rotating restaurant at the new building. And so they start this project in 1971, and they get a little bit of the way through building the tower, and all of a sudden they start to hit some financial troubles, and the ministry starts to tank financially, and they have to stop construction. And so if you go to Cuyahoga Falls today, there is still this half-finished tower that's still hundreds of feet tall. It just sat doing nothing for many years. A few years ago, a local businessman bought it for $30,000, and it is now the world's ugliest cell phone tower. Okay, it's just this concrete mess that you see as you drive into the city. And it's known as Hummard's Folly. I don't have a picture of it that we could put up, but if you Google it, you're gonna find some other crass nicknames for the building as well, so just fair warning. And we can judge him and ridicule him because it's easy to do, right? But we all have a half-built tower in our life. It may not be this living monument sitting in Northeast Ohio, but we all have a half-built tower. We've been in this series called What's the Point? We just started it last week where we're talking about the parables of Jesus. And if you've been around Movement this year, you know that we've been reading through the New Testament and journaling through that together. And so just a little track update, you should be around the Gospel of John by now. We've been just reading cover to cover the New Testament. We've been going through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All of these are different gospel accounts, story accounts of the life of Jesus. And if you read them, what you'll find is there's many parts that overlap, different teachings, different miracles, different moments. And we are going through this series on parables to hopefully connect some of those dots and dive a little bit deeper. What a parable is it's just a short story about who Jesus was and what his mission was. Jesus told these short stories, and they were meant to give a greater glimpse into who he was and what he was about. And a parable would do two things because it was a story. For those who were interested in knowing more about Jesus and his mission, it would reveal more about him. It would teach them. And as they pondered about it and they would think about it, they would say, oh, Jesus must mean this. There must be greater meaning to this parable. And for those who were opposed to Jesus, and if you know anything about his life, there were many who were opposed to him. These stories were meant to also conceal some of the bold statements he was saying to buy himself more time, because there were several people who wanted Jesus put to death. They were those who were against him. And so for those who were open-minded, it revealed more about what he was saying. And to those who were against him, he was trying to conceal some of his bold statements. And so today we are exactly going to look at a parable Jesus tells about building a tower without having counted the cost. And we're going to be in Luke 14, verses 25 through 33. So if you have your phone or you brought a Bible, scroll through that, open it up to there. Don't bother using the Bibles under the chairs, just because I'm going to be reading from the NIV translation and those are NLT. But either way, follow along and we'll make sure to have it up on the screens there for you too. Luke 14, verses 25 through 33. And so it says this: Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, 'This person began to build and wasn't able to finish.' Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able, with 10,000 men, to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he's not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples." So this parable that we're looking at, this counting the cost speech, this is at a very pivotal moment in Jesus' life and ministry. Let me tell you why. There's two big things happening, and it says it right there in what we just read. First of all, we know that he's on his way to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the capital city of Israel. It's this holy, sacred city, and Jesus would have been there many times. Like, that's where he taught. That's where he performed some of his miracles. It's the spiritual, religious hub for Jewish faith. And Jesus is on his way there. And that's a big deal because remember how we were talking about people were opposed to him and wanted him dead? A lot of those people lived in Jerusalem. And so on his journey there, he's even telling his disciples that in Jerusalem, he's gonna die. He's gonna lay down his life. He tells them multiple times. In fact, one of his disciples, Peter, tries to say that's not gonna happen. And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." And Jesus expects that the reason he's going to Jerusalem, he says, is to lay down my life. Not that anyone could take it from him, but to offer himself in that way. So that's the first thing we know. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. He's traveling there. He knows he's going to die. But Jesus also has a large following, right? It says large crowds were traveling with him. I'm not sure if they were going with him to Jerusalem or if they were just there for that part of the journey. But they certainly didn't think that what Jesus was doing in his life was going to Jerusalem to die. In fact, what they would have expected, that here they see this prolific teacher, this charismatic leader, this guy who's down to earth, he's a miracle worker, and what Jesus was to them was someone who you wanted to be around. Like, people who were around Jesus, good things happened. You know what I'm saying? He was where they were from. He just made sense to them. He seemed to care about what they cared about. He got them. He was from where they were from. He spoke their language. He spoke their heart language. And Jesus was just easy to be around. And at that moment in time, following Jesus was just the thing almost everyone was doing. It was the trend, right? So a large crowd is following with him. You know what, like, this is like the Eros tour, okay? There's like 60 million people and there's only 600,000 tickets. And it's just like a madhouse trying to get the tickets. Or like when Messi signed to Miami, do you know that ticket sales against Miami soccer team went up 1,000% in their price? It's crazy, right? Like there's just this swoop of trend and everyone wants to be around Jesus. So is this what Jesus was hoping for? Like, did Jesus want to ride the trend train? Was he like on an upward tick toward influence? No. In fact, Jesus, this is the most concerning thing about the people following him. This is his greatest concern, is that exactly because of that they're only following him because it was the trend. And Jesus wants the crowds to understand one important thing before they continue following him to Jerusalem. And it's that there's a cost to following him. And every one of us has a limit to the cost we're willing to pay for something, right? And usually if it's a trend, we're willing to pay a higher cost for that. I don't know if you have ever seen people like camp out outside of Best Buy or Apple when there's like a new device being released. But when there's hype for something, we're willing to pay a higher price tag for it. And when the trend dies out, which all trends eventually do pass away and die out and fade away, the buzz is just not the same. What actually goes on in our human psyche that makes us want to follow a trend? Sometimes it's a desire to be current or relevant or in the know. Sometimes it's a feeling that we have status or that we matter because we're following the trend. Or maybe it's an even like a deeper longing to be enough or to have the thing that could make us whole. We kind of have to evaluate that we're maybe sometimes following because we think that this is the thing I've been looking for, that this is what I've always needed to be, the person I haven't been able to become, the person I've always wanted to be. Jesus does promise, though, that those who follow him would experience life. He says they would experience life to the full, or life as it was meant to be experienced, true life. And that's the crazy thing about Jesus is any offer he makes, any incentive he has is genuine. But the strategies that Jesus has for getting people on the hook and reeling them in are just totally backwards from what we're used to. He would be a bad digital marketer today, right? Like for 1 year, I had to be a digital marketer and I was so bad at it because you had to like know how to get people on the hook and reel them in. Jesus would be awful as well. He didn't announce the next free giveaway to keep people around. He didn't paint a picture of following him as carefree and easy with better pay and benefits. In fact, what Jesus does is he gives them an out because following him is not easy. The gate is wide that leads to destruction. Many take it. And the gate is narrow that leads to life, and only few find it. And so I mentioned earlier that every single one of us has a half-built tower. Here's what I mean by that. What I mean by a half-built tower is that we've all started something with great intent that we would see it through. But things didn't go as expected. And it left us disappointed, disillusioned, and defeated. And that might have been a degree, like you wanted to get an education and you didn't finish it. That might have been a job that you thought would be a dream job. That may have been a marriage that ended, or a relationship. That could have been a church that you were a part of, or any goal or dream that you have. And it stands in your heart as a colossal failure, a regret you wish would go away. A hope that you wish would have been realized. And I know what those are in my own life. I don't know what yours are. And my point is not to shame us about those things. We already feel shame about those things. And I'm definitely not gonna pose as like a motivational speaker today and be like, we're gonna accomplish all of our dreams today. I'm gonna tell you the 3-step plan how. What I do want to do is I want us to count the cost of following Jesus and how it's the one thing we can't afford to half build. And so here's what I want you to walk away with today, what I hope you would walk away with. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the obstacles that Jesus says exist that would keep you from following him for the long haul. He mentions at least 3 obstacles in your faith journey with him. The second thing I hope you would take away is understanding how Jesus actually wants you to respond to this parable. Because when Jesus told these stories, he was trying to be cryptic for those he was trying to preserve himself from, but he was trying to actually tell us something. So for all of us who are here at church right now or who are reading and journaling through the New Testament, those of you who want to ponder and understand what Jesus meant, I want to be really clear about what he was expecting our response to be and how he would hope we would live differently in light of this parable. Sound good? Okay, so here is the first obstacle of the 3. The first obstacle that we'll have to face in following him for the long haul is our relationships. It's going to be our relationships. So many of us live for our relationships, right? They are our greatest hope and our greatest joy, and some relationships are also our greatest disappointment in life. Let's just start with parents for a minute, right? Everyone has a grievance with their parents, right? There was something they did wrong. And if you are a parent, you are determined to make sure you don't repeat the same thing. And then you have kids, and maybe you have multiple kids, and you realize that your humanity is so in the way of parenting, and you lose your temper, and you're not as great as you would have expected to be, and it's a lot harder than you anticipated. And the grandparents just sit around and snicker. It's awesome. Maybe it is finding a spouse, right? Like that has maybe been your greatest hope, is to find someone you can spend the rest of your life with. And it can ache at our hearts if we think that'll never be realized. We maybe miss our friends from college. I don't know about you, but for me, I had to stay in this tiny concrete jail cell with bunk beds in it, and it was the smallest container I had ever lived in my human life, but I loved getting to be around my college friends and the trouble we got into and the things that we got to be crazy with late at night and playing video games and eating whatever we wanted. And maybe you miss those relationships, you miss that life, and it's just not the same anymore. Maybe it's you love your job, but you can't stand that one coworker on the team and it's ruining the job for you. Or there's a pastor or a boss or an influencer you think if I just am in proximity to them, if I just have access to them. See, relationships shape so much of what we long for. And Jesus says something strange. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And this seems backwards from the teaching of Jesus. I don't know how much you know about the things Jesus said, but this is the only time he tells us to hate people. What you normally hear from Jesus is love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you and honor your mother and father. And if you have anger or hatred in your heart, that it's the same as murdering someone in your heart. So why does Jesus say something like, hey, if you don't hate your mother and father, your brothers, sisters, even yourself, you can't follow me? In ancient Near Eastern literature, the idea of hating something wasn't just disdain, it was also a matter of priorities. And so Jesus is leveraging some of this intense language to show and expose a matter of your priorities relationally. And so Jesus is asking those who are traveling with him to search their hearts and evaluate the relationships that might become an obstacle to following him. And we might ask, who in our lives is such a high priority that our world revolves around them? Is it someone already in our life? Someone incredibly important to us, like a spouse or a child or a friend or a family member? And if we admit it, we know that our worlds possibly can't revolve around them because there's no way they could meet all of our desperate expectation. Or maybe it's someone you wish you had, someone you long for, like a spouse or a child or a best friend or a mentor, a safe person. And you're looking for it. Your life feels empty or incomplete. And if I just had that relationship, I could be whole. Jesus warns us this. He says, be careful of allowing your relationships to dictate how you follow me. Because really, how you follow me should dictate your relationships. He says, don't put your life stock in what you have or don't have relationally. He says, look at me. Look me in the eye. I want a deep and personal and intimate relationship with you. I can be enough. So the first obstacle is our relationships. The second obstacle is our plans. It's our plans. we all have gotten to a point where we've bitten off more than we can chew, right? Something that started as like a fun addition to our life, and then it just takes over, and like the tail starts to wag the dog. I don't know if you've ever had like a hobby or like a passion, and you're like, I'm gonna do that more, and you're gonna turn it into a side hustle. And then a few months later, you're like, every night and weekend is taken up with this thing. Or if you have kids, and you're like, I'm gonna be a good parent, I'm gonna sign them up for a sport. And then you find out they're friends in another sport, and so you have to sign them up for two. And then you're like, how do I go to two places at once? And you're well-meaning, and you're trying to just chase something that you enjoy. You're trying to be a good parent. And what happens after a while is you realize, I can't fit all this in my life. No one could. Like, I'm drowning in all of my plans and priorities. And it ends up just being a chaotic whirlwind of commitments we are trying to cram into our life. And if you're trying to follow Jesus in the midst of, let's call it just being an American, it's incredibly easy to neglect our relationship with him. It's incredibly easy for our faith to fall into the margins because there's just not enough room for everything. What has to happen? Jesus says this, he says, whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? Now we know that Jesus, he's going to Jerusalem, he's gonna die. We know that his death is gonna be on a cross. This is even bigger though. The idea of crucifying someone in the Roman culture, it carried more meaning behind it. Like when you would see someone being crucified or someone carry their cross on the way to execution, that symbol was a sign of shame and it was a sign of death. And so Jesus is taking the imagery of that, the shame and the death of a crucifixion, and he's saying, that's a lot like what following me is like. That this tool for humiliation and for execution, this device that someone carried alone while others looked at them in critique, was a lot like following him. And so in the same way that we would ridicule anyone who started building a tower and didn't complete it, we won't mention any names. This is what connotation comes with Jesus. What can we really see through to the end? Like, are we willing to pay for this at all cost? Jesus even uses another parable about a king going out to war and wondering, can I actually win this? Or do we just need to fold now? Because what's the point of losing a bunch of men? What's the point of killing half this nation if we just need to surrender? Are we really gonna do this? Do we have what it takes? Are we willing to die for it? Or should we just admit now we can't? And the point of all of this, what Jesus is saying with our plans, he's saying, don't spread yourself so thin that you aren't faithful to what actually matters. We've all seen what happens when work becomes a higher priority than our loved ones. We've all seen what happens when someone tries to go into marriage, keeping all of their life and relationships the same as before they entered into marriage. It doesn't go well. We've all seen what happens when someone goes off to college and instead of disciplining themselves, they party away their bored and tuition. Jesus is saying you won't be able to live your life for yourself anymore if you follow me. You won't just be able to plan and order your life however you want. There's a cost to bear. You're gonna miss out on things. People are going to view following him as a mark of shame and ridicule. They'll say things like this. They'll say, why doesn't she just move in with her boyfriend? I mean, if she loves him and they're together, she can do whatever she wants. Why does she care about that? Or they'll say, why does he waste so much time and money on his church? Doesn't he know what churches do, what pastors do? how controlling they are, how fake they are? Why does she let her small group leader have a say in her decisions? Shouldn't they just support her and not give pushback? Why did he turn down that promotion? Yeah, I know it's going to be more hours, and it's going to be more money. Doesn't he want to get ahead? Doesn't he want to get more, make a name for himself? Is he really going to let his family and his faith and his church community get in the way of that? This is the kind of shame. It just doesn't make sense. The only other kind of shame that's worse than doing the kinds of things that are a part of following Jesus are saying you follow Jesus, but then not actually following through. Right? Can you believe she calls herself a follower of Jesus, and then the way she talks about our team in the Slack channel, she just cuts them down. Can you believe he calls himself a Jesus follower and pads his expense account? I can see it all. It's right there in QuickBooks. She says she's a follower of Jesus, but I know she's married, and every day I catch her flirting with the boss. Yeah, he says he's a follower of Jesus, but the way he views and talks about people different from him, people like immigrants, people of color, is just despicable. How could you say that about people like that? Did you count the cost? What happens when Jesus actually asks you to change something about your life? What happens when your plans are different than his? See, that's why Jesus says following him is going to be a death. It's going to be a death to your plans. It's going to be a death to your pride. It's going to be a death to saving face. It's going to be a death to doing life your way or having it all. It's going to be a death to others' approval. And Jesus is saying, are you willing to see this through to the end, even when it kills you or it kills your plans? The third obstacle, other than relationships and our plans, is our possessions. So this is fascinating. I was reading this psychologist named Russell Belk, all right? And apparently he did this big work on the effect that our possessions have on us. He says that possessions are more than just things that we own. He says this: possessions are extensions of ourselves. Possessions not only extend what we can do, right? Like I can cut this tree down with this chainsaw. It's a thing I have. It's more than just extending what we can do. They represent us. They have symbolic meaning, and we wax and wane depending on how our possessions prosper. All right, so our possessions are more than just things. They represent us. They have symbolic meaning. They're an extension of us. So if you come to my house, the first thing you'll do, right, you'll take off your coat and you'll be like, nice place here. And then what you'll see is 70 Starbucks mugs. And you'll be like, holy cow. And I'll be like, yes, let's go talk about this for a minute. And I'll say, these are from all the places we've traveled. This one's from Atlanta. This one's from Cancun. And they make these Starbucks all across the world. And you're like, that's so cool. Can I drink out of one of them? And I'll say, no, you can't drink out of one of the Starbucks mugs. They're part of my collection. You're gonna ruin it. And they're special, right? And they're this representation of where I've been, and I don't want them to get broken. And let's be honest, they're partially part of the kids' college fund, and I need them to be intact in 18 years. And it's just something that is an extension of our life. And then that can be anything. Maybe you're not Starbucks mugs people. Maybe it's your car, your clothes. For me too, books are this way. Like I brought like 14 or 15 boxes of books from Northeast Ohio when we moved here, and I want them to be out so I can see them all. And some people even color coordinate their books on the shelf, and it looks so good. And I just love to take pictures of people's bookshelves, and I don't even like to buy digital books because then you can't see it. For most of you guys, it's the Buckeyes, right? Thankfully, no losses yet. But man, I've seen some really bad weekends where people are just like, I don't even want to go on living. Because we feel like such a deep ownership of a team that you don't even own. You just own a knockoff jersey. Possessions make us feel like we're who we're supposed to be, right? that our lives are more than what they are, that there's security, there's significance. And what Jesus will often do is he will deconstruct our material world. And the stuff that we have and often think we need really doesn't matter. Like we're about to enter this season of Thanksgiving, and we're gonna be so grateful for everything that we have. And then you're gonna get an email on Friday morning. You're gonna get 100 emails that say, this TV is half off. You need it. And you're gonna say, yes, I do. I do need this new TV. And we're gonna talk this big game of contentment and thankfulness, and then the stuff is gonna start to threaten that. It's not enough. We need more. Jesus's line for what is necessary is just so much further than ours. It's so minimal that we can barely handle it. Here's what he says. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything, you cannot be my disciples. Everything? Like, Jesus, what about food? What about like my house? What about clothes? What about a car or even like a savings account or retirement? What about job security? I mean, those are things I genuinely feel like I'm like, what am I supposed to do without that stuff? It feels like Jesus is on a different planet when he says things like, don't worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body and what you will wear. Isn't life more than food and the body more than clothes? And we're like, okay, Jesus, yeah, I get it. Like there's things that are more important. But what we need, Jesus is just starting to push on to that. Even the things we think we need the most, Jesus pushes back. And the way of Jesus requires seeing the material world and what is necessary totally different. He's just trying to say, I'm the one thing you can't afford to lose. You could get everything else in life, but if you don't have me, you'd still have nothing. All of this isn't going to matter one day anyway. You need to see what will last forever, what has eternal value, and you need to place greater weight on those things that last for eternity. You need to see that I can actually provide you the significance and the security and the satisfaction you're looking for. Now, these are just the three things Jesus mentions here: our relationships, our plans, our possessions. And that's a great starting point. There's probably more. But hopefully we're now aware of what the difference between someone who's curious and someone who's committed is going to have to wrestle through. The same way Jesus looked at all those traveling with him, he looks at you and says, it's going to cost something. I don't want you to get halfway in and then turn around and go home. The second thing I wanted to leave you with was, how does Jesus actually expect you to respond to this parable? Like what did he hope they would do? And I think a way to summarize it is just to say that Jesus hoped they would follow him with resilient faith. I remember a few years back, I was reading a book called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. It was by an author named Eugene Peterson. He's since passed. But I remember picking this book up, feeling a sense of that, like, man, I'm kind of here I would just become a pastor. I'm at the beginning of my journey in leading others spiritually, and just feeling the weight of that title, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. Here's what he said. Peterson said, it's not difficult in our world to get a person interested in the message of the gospel, but it is terrifically difficult to sustain the interest. Right? There's enough good things about Jesus. It's not hard to get someone interested, but to keep someone interested is incredibly difficult. He says, the aspect of our world that makes the work of living Christian and in the way of faith most difficult is today's passion for the immediate and the casual. The immediate and the casual. We want that more than anything else, that those things will get in the way of following Jesus more than anything else. They will keep us from being resilient. Because a desire for the immediate and for the instant will suffocate a long-term, patient life of following Jesus. The desire for the casual and the easy, it will frustrate a high commitment and difficult life of following Jesus. And so the response Jesus is looking for is a resilient faith, a long obedience in the same direction. He's saying, you need to decide right now, while we're on our way to Jerusalem, while we're on our way to my death, if you're actually in. Otherwise, you should turn around and go home if you're not all in. What does resilient faith take? What does a long obedience in the same direction require? I would say this, and this is our big idea for the day, that resilient faith in Jesus requires a predetermined yes. A predetermined yes. And what I mean by that in the context of faith is that we can't have conditions on if we will trust God and follow him. There's no what ifs, there's no but ifs. If there's anything in our heart that we can identify that says, okay, God, I will follow you if you do blank. Or I will do this in my life, God, if you do this in my life. You can't take that away. But I need you to give me that, God. I will be the most ferocious follower of you, but I'm expecting this. See, the predetermined yes is unconditional. We don't get to enter into a relationship with God and negotiate. He's God. It's on his terms. We bring nothing to the table. And so if we can identify that there's something in our life we think we have to have to journey with Jesus, or something we feel like we couldn't lose and still call him Lord, these are those pivotal moments for us. Those are the moments where Jesus is saying, are you gonna keep coming to Jerusalem? Because if you can't say yes here, turn around. You have to follow me, even when it leads to death, even when it changes your relationships and your plans and your possessions. It's gonna cost us a complete surrender of our hearts and lives. It isn't just for when it's convenient or popular or the trend. We don't just follow Jesus when we get the approval of others or when things go our way. Because when that changes, that's when most people give up. And they move on and look for something else for their life to be about. Jesus is the ultimate example of this. When he gets to Jerusalem, everyone's cheering for him. Yay, King Jesus. And he's weeping. And he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, how long I have wanted to gather you as a mother hen gathers her chicks, but you wouldn't let me." He hears all the hype and the buzz, and he goes, "You're not gonna stick around." It breaks his heart. Jesus later that night, he's praying in a garden, and even his best friends can't stay awake with him, and he's in turmoil. He knows he's gonna offer his life, but he says, "Father, if there's any way, may this cup pass from me. Is there another way than walking through death to accomplish your plan?" And Jesus says the most important words for any person who wants to develop resilient faith, and it's, "But not my will, yours be done." That is at the heart of resilient faith, is not my will, but your will be done. It's the predetermined yes. And so we have to ask ourselves, am I willing to follow Jesus regardless of what it looks like? What's it going to cost for you to follow Jesus? You might not know what that is right now, but at some point you will be brought face to face with it. You're going to be at a decision point where you're halfway through building the tower, you're halfway into this life with him, and you're going to be tempted to fold on the project. I want to show you something really quick that is meant to encourage us in that resilient faith. It comes from a part of the Bible in Hebrews 12, and I'm going to have it up here on the screen. Let me read it to you. It says, "Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart." Consider him. When you're weary and losing heart, you consider Jesus. He's the pioneer and perfecter of faith. He led the way in laying his life down. He's the resilient one. That same author, Eugene Peterson, he did a translation called The Message, and this is how he worded it in Hebrews 12. He said, "Keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race we're in. Study how he did it, because he never lost sight of where he was headed. That exhilarating faith in and with God. He could put up with anything along the way, cross, shame, whatever. And he's there in the place of honor right alongside God. And so when you find yourselves flagging in your faith, go over that story again, item by item, that long litany of hostility he plowed through that will shoot adrenaline into your souls. See, Jesus led the way of resilience. When you're at the halfway point and you have nothing left, we go back to him to find that way. He is the inspiration and the motivation for carrying on in the path to following him. He laid it all down. But he's not just our inspiration and motivation. He's our salvation. You're not going to be able to do it. Like no one gets through the life of following Jesus scotch-free. Every one of us half builds it. And you're just like not going to be able to do it enough. And what you need is someone to rescue you because he was the only one who could see it through. Like this is what we call the gospel of Jesus, is that you leave today not just fired up to be more resilient, but more humbled and dependent by the fact that you couldn't be all that Jesus was, but he was for you. That Jesus is what you've been looking for. That nothing else, not even yourself, can really be worth bearing the full weight of your hope other than Jesus. Nothing will endure the same way that Jesus does. Because what else can you purposefully try to reject and extinguish that will continue to pursue you and advocate for you and offer rescue? Who else will lay down their life for you regardless of if you deserve it or not? Who else can promise and deliver that they will always be faithful to you, that no matter where you go or who you're with or what you're facing, they will never leave you and always stay with you? Who else can handle your failures and mistakes with unlimited grace and forgiveness? What else doesn't just offer you an insulated and comfortable life, but freedom that no one could ever take from you? What else can offer hope and a new life beyond death and cancer and catastrophes? Jesus is the only thing worth putting our hope in, not our own resilience, not our own discipline, not our relationships or our plans or possession. It's just him. And he's enough. If you've been in that place of struggling to have that adrenaline shoot through your veins in following Jesus, you've half built it and it's fallen through too many times. I would encourage you to do something this week. You got a little break with Thanksgiving. I would encourage you to go back into Hebrews, where we were just reading. Actually, I want you to go to Hebrews 11:1 through 12:13, and I want you to read it a few times. I want you to carve out 20 minutes, get up early, or after one of the football games, go sit out on the porch and read it. Because what you're gonna find is a chapter full of a bunch of messy, half-built people who followed God. Names like Abraham and Moses and David and prophets who all were shipwrecked in their faith at one point or another. Committed adultery, had people murdered, gave people up, were disappointed by those around them, mocked. And yet they're the ones we look to say, keep going. That even though they half built it and the money was out, God intervened and still pursued them. And I want you to see, as you read that, what's my next yes with Jesus? Because that's what resilient faith is it's just that predetermined yes, the next yes, and following him into it. God, I just pray that as we finish this time up today, that we wouldn't be discouraged or self-defeated, either by where we're at now or just how we've walked this, but we would see you and only you, God, not our failure, not our shame, not our incompleteness, not all the broken pieces. God, you just ask us to lay that down at your feet. And you say, I can meet you there. If we could just believe, Jesus, that word is true and good, that you will meet us there, that you will rebuild our lives, that you are enduring and faithful and resilient for us, God, that can give us what we need to carry ourselves through an entire life. And I just pray that you would settle us into who you are, Jesus, and your goodness and the reality of your presence. Redeem us and motivate us to keep following you. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.